Okay, so turning to the methods, kind of how I designed this study to um, address my issue. This is the hypothesis I came up with. Empathy levels of OT students will increase following participation in a course that involves the close reading of literary narratives. So I was going to drill it down right to one particular course and see if the narrative medicine curriculum would make a difference in terms of empathy levels. And this was the big question of the research questions. How do levels of empathy change in OT students who engage in a course that involves the close reading of literary narratives? All the other questions, not to get too much into them, but they kind of address these outside factors that the literature has shown influence empathy as well around gender, educational level, reading, prior reading, novels read, and GPA in the sense of commitment to the curriculum, how committed they were to the class and studying and all that. The design of the research project, when I was thinking about the design, I was kind of tackling a couple of different kind of things. The first thing I was tackling was, should I make this a purely qualitative study? Is it at the point where I'm really need to kind of discover the theory that I'm working towards? Am I kind of creating and trying to understand a new theory here? The terms, am I still trying to kind of get a good definition of the terms? Am I at that point in the study? And I felt like I really wasn't. In other words, I didn't really feel like I was starting from scratch. I felt like I had a theory, or there was a theory in the literature. I definitely needed to kind of funnel it and kind of design it towards the OT needs. But the theory was there, I think, to a degree. And the curriculum, I felt like, was there as well around narrative medicine. Definitely, again, had to refine that a lot towards OT needs. But I felt like, to a degree, they were there, so I wasn't really thinking purely qualitative. In another sense, kind of the second thing I was grappling with, I didn't think it definitely was there, but I didn't think it was really kind of set. There wasn't an established OT curriculum, an established kind of OT theory or model to teach empathy to OT students. I didn't feel like I was at the point where I'm just kind of purely confirming theory, purely confirming an established curriculum. In other words, I didn't feel like I was ready to see if this worked for all the OT students, the OT student population as a whole. So I didn't feel like questions of causation or generalization were appropriate. And mostly I felt this because my focus is still really the curriculum itself, designing, refining a curriculum that potentially worked. So before I really even get into other larger questions, I felt like, do I have anything here? Let's just see if this curriculum works with a particular class. And the curriculum is very much a novel thing for an OT program. Definitely there are aspects of humanities that are in different courses, but to my understanding, there's really no OT program that uses narrative medicine as a whole or any of our particular class. So it's a completely new thing. Definitely there's a kind of established theory, and I'm kind of basing it to a degree on an established curriculum, but it's very much a new thing OT-wise. So that I felt like this is my focus. I need to kind of look at the curriculum. That's why I kind of thought, okay, quasi-experimental, see pre and post test for just this particular class, just this particular population, and not even think about larger questions until I kind of get this first step under my belt. The instruments that I was going to use for that larger question, would the empathy levels change, were these two instruments I decided on. The JSC, the Jefferson Scale of Empathy. The JSC is a commonly used self-report survey of empathy, commonly used in medical school programs, healthcare programs, to see through the medical humanities courses increased levels of empathy. It's used in practice as well. A lot of those larger studies, those very influential studies I'm talking a little more about in a second, had the JSC as their measure of empathy with healthcare providers, healthcare clinicians. So that was more self-report, kind of regulation, understanding, sensitive to empathy. The reading the mind in the eyes test, the RMET, is more empathic performance. What it does is it measures theory of mind performance, at least one aspect of theory of mind performance, through photographic images, photographs of people, just of people's eyes, You have to look at the eyes and kind of determine what emotion are they expressing. So that was more empathic performance. So these are kind of the two scales I thought I could use to kind of address that big, huge question. The curriculum, as I said, was based on narrative medicine. I focused in particular on the reading part. You read a lot of short stories, literary short stories, novels, a lot of discussions as a design, student-led discussions, professor-led discussions. And I felt like through all these discussions, I was really kind of getting at these aspects of empathy as I defined it: theory of mind, resonance, regulation, reflection, and communication, dialogue, genuine communication through communication theory. What did the study show? What were the findings? Just kind of looking at the descriptive data to start out with. I think this kind of explains a lot in terms of the outside factors. I didn't really see anything of significance with the outside factors. In particular, the Pearson-R correlations I did around GPA, and novels read. They had slight to moderate correlations. So there was not a strong correlation with the Pearson-R's between GPA and novels read. Part of that you could surmise was just the numbers. I mean, the N was very small, but even more particular, the number of males was very small. The GPA, there was just very little variation in GPA, and they were all right around the same kind of number there. Novels read, there was some variation. It's a little bit deceptive. They were assigned to read a novel during the class, so that number went up. But again, there was no strong correlation between novels read and empathy, unlike the literature. Other categories, GPA, did a t-test, GPA between empathy. Gender, did t-test between gender and empathy. And there was no statistical significance between the two. And again, just 4 males. What does that mean, if anything? Educational levels, did an ANOVA, to all the educational groups in empathy. Didn't find any statistical significance between any of the levels of empathy. Again, most of the students were undergrads. There wasn't a lot of variation there as well. So the outside factors didn't seem to play much of a role in terms of influencing the empathy levels of the students, or as an indicator of influence. I don't know whether they influenced one way or the other, but it was not a strong indicator that these outside factors played a potential role in empathy levels. The two big questions around empathy, pre to post test, the JSC, the mean average there went up, as you can see, from 99 to baseline 116 post. The RMET, the images, the photographic images, did not change really at all, hardly. It went down, if anything. Statistical test with the independent samples t-test, the JSC pre to post test was definitely very significant statistically, and there was no significance with the RMET. So kind of, what does this mean? Getting into discussion. Before I get into the big question I tackled, limitations to the study. Limitations of the study as designed. The first limitation was the pandemic. As it did everything, middle of March, middle of the class, everything shifted. Everything was in person prior to the labs, the lectures. After that, it all went to online, and it wasn't live online, live Zooms. It was asynchronous, so it was all recorded. Everything was recorded. We did some student discussion forums online, but again, it was not in person. There was no more student-led discussions. We had gotten about a third of the way through those, so most of the students, at least half the students, did not do their student-led discussion. There was no professor-led discussion around the readings. There was no impromptu discussion. A lot of times students just stop in and they want to talk about the book or they have questions about the book. All that stopped. And as I was saying, this is a huge part of what they do at Columbia. The in-person discussion, reflection, this is kind of what the heart and soul of what close reading is. And I kind of lost a lot of that to the last half of the class. Empathy and social desirability. There's literature showing that healthcare students, especially, are very sensitive to this perception of being empathic or very having qualities of empathy. So you could surmise that the OT students, especially the second time around, want to do good on this survey that they knew was about empathy, to show that they're empathetic, that they have these qualities to be an OT, potentially. That's another potential limitation. Tackling the research questions, tackling that first big questions, did the empathy levels change pre to post test? They did with the JSC, quite systemically they changed pre to post test. Again, this is not showing causation. It's not showing that I can say, okay, the curriculum did this and it directly influenced these JSC levels. It wasn't the design of the study. It did not show that. But again, thinking my focus is refining this curriculum, getting at this curriculum, see if I have something with this curriculum. It is a strong indicator that potentially the curriculum as designed, or at least aspects of the curriculum as designed, improved these JSC scores. I also think a couple other things are kind of significant around these JSC scores, or the JSC in general. The students, the OT students, prior to taking the class that was studied, they'd already had a year in the OT program, the graduate level program. And in that year, they'd already had all their theoretical classes, all their classes on OT theory, those espoused values that we talked about earlier. So they'd had the values of OT, and they'd also spent a lot of time just observing other occupational therapists in actual practice. So they knew the theory, and they had seen OTs in practice. And yet, when they took the pretest on the JSC, they scored very low in terms of the empathy levels. They were below the norm, in fact. And then, of course, the levels went up after the class. So you could, it's an indicator, you could surmise to a degree that there's something missing in this particular curriculum or this particular OT program, that this class maybe, it's an indicator, you could surmise again, is filling a missing gap, meaning filling a missing need in terms of teaching the students to be more empathic that they weren't getting from the theory classes and they weren't getting from watching OTs in practice. Secondly, the JSC I think is significant because it's been used in the actual practice of healthcare. In particular, two large studies, Canali et al. In 2011, Hojat in 2012, showed quite clearly with control groups. The Canali one had over 20,000 patients. The Hojat one had over 890 patients over a 3-year period. And both those studies quite clearly with controls that practitioners with higher levels of empathy as measured by the JSC correlated with improved outcomes. So in other words, patients did better if their practitioners were more empathic as measured by the JSC versus patients that did worse if their doctors had low empathy scores on the JSC. So in a sense, the measures were around diabetic management, different aspects of diabetic management, I think, in both studies. But in a sense, this shows that in the real world practice, the JSC may be measuring the kind of empathy that is effective. This kind of perspective taking or whatever it is the JSC is measuring may be the kind of empathy that really works in the real world versus the theoretical academic world. And then you could surmise potentially, or this is again as an indicator, that this curriculum that I did for the study is onto potentially teaching the students the kind of empathy that they're going to need that's going to be effective in practice. So in that sense, the JSC I think is significant. Can't really tell with this kind of study how significant those studies, the results were, but again, it's an indicator that maybe onto something that's worthy of further study, worthy of further inquiry. On the other side, conversely, the JSC is self-report. It's just the students reporting how empathetic they feel they are, how important I think empathy is in practice. So it's sensitive to social desirability. And it's even just, when you look at our big definition of empathy, it's just just a limited part of empathy, kind of regulation, awareness, that sort of thing. It claims to be measuring theory of mind and emotional resonance, but again, it's just from a self-report, self-awareness kind of thing. So the best we can say is that the students potentially became more sensitive to, more aware of the role of empathy in practice. You can't say that they performed more empathically. Empathic performance was measured through the RMET. There's no difference really in the scores with that. Why that is, I'm sure there's a host of different reasons. Some of the reasons that kind of stuck out to me, the pandemic itself, when they took that survey the second time, the first time they took it, they were in my presence, and I was there in the class, and they were doing it online on their laptops. The second time, I was not there. They were doing it, who knows where, in their dorms, in their rooms, watching TV, and it was weeks. I think within 2 weeks after the class had finished. And the RMET, unlike the JSC, is more involved. With the RMET, there's like 36 questions versus 20 just Likert questions with the JSC. And these questions have the images I talked about, and the images are very subtle. You have to kind of study them closely to pick up what the emotion you think that they're expressing. So it's more demanding, and maybe why 7 students, there was 38 students in the class, 7 students did not even take the survey the second time. They just didn't bother to do it. I don't know how much I cajoled them. And of those 31 that did take it, how much effort did they give it the second time? It's hard to say. It's also significant to note that there was a difference in how I taught my class, one difference between how I taught the class between the narrative medicine program and Columbia. I did not use artistic images. I did not have them study paintings or artistic photographs. Columbia, they do that. They bring in art critics, that sort of thing, and they spend a lot of time doing this. I didn't do this. Maybe if I had done this, it may make them more sensitive, developing that skill around empathic performance, theory of mind, that's as measured through the RMET. Maybe not. Who knows? Also, what's so significant, in the literature, a lot of the studies that showed this improvement, and a lot of them did use the RMET, pre to post test after reading literary narratives, they did this relatively immediately after reading the story. So the participants did the reading, and then they took the RMET. With my class, there was a delay. As much as a month delay between when they finished their readings and reflection and then took the RMET. And this delay may not mean anything, or may be very significant, definitely worthy of further inquiry, because is it going to carry over into practice? Or is it just something that happens within the class and it's very fleeting? The outside factors, we talked about that. There was no really big connection between the outside factors, unlike literature and the empathy levels. This may be significant in terms of, you could surmise it's an indicator that, again, the data is very flawed and limited, but it's a potential indicator that it wasn't something outside the class that drove these JSC improvement scores. It was something that happened inside the class. Was it the curriculum? Was it something the teacher said? Something that happened within that semester? If it wasn't these outside factors. Kind of in conclusion, and I'm thinking about future study. In conclusion, I think these findings are significant. I think the idea of what's going on in OT is significant. This crisis, this growing disconnect, this incongruence, lost values is important to OT. It's important that we start to think more and more of a dialogue of how are we going to address this? What are potential solutions? I think this is the beginning of a potential solution, the beginning of a kind of a dialogue of a potential curriculum that may have some potential to address the complexity, the wholeness of this problem. And I think the JSC score is a kind of indicator that maybe onto something. The literature is supporting this again. Maybe empathy, returning more to empathy through literary narratives is a way to get the profession back to its values and see that and do this and make that connection between empathy and practice. And kind of in line with this, when thinking about future study, I still think I'm at the point of trying to refine the curriculum. I'm not at the point where this is the curriculum and I need to take it out to OT as a whole to see if it works for all OT schools across the country. These generalization kind of questions. Still think I'm kind of refining curriculum. Still think I'm kind of even refining theory a little bit. But the next step to me is taking it to practice. Does this curriculum, this teaching of empathy through literary narratives, does it carry over into practice? And that can be done very easily at Hudson, because right after this class is done, they go into fieldwork. They do this intense 3 months clinical rotation. Is it carrying over? You could do look at their journals, look at their capstones they write about their fieldwork experiences, do qualitative interviews, post the fieldwork experience to see did they practice with empathy? Did they, what kind of roadblocks did they run into? I think with this, I think simulations, use of actors, patients, actors playing out the role of patients within the class. These are ways of kind of taking the next step and not getting away from just the classroom, seeing these concepts, this curriculum carries over into simulations, carries over into practice. So you have that great connection, more truthful connection between the classroom and the real world, and you can see, okay, this worked, this didn't work, and you can kind of refine that curriculum to make it more closely meet real world expectations, kind of thing. That to me is really the next step with this whole kind of project. Okay, so that is that, and then any questions, please let me know.